Our next speaker is Lord Christopher Monckton, Viscount of Brenchley. And I want to thank Lord Monckton for coming here all the way from the Highlands of Scotland.
Wonderful to be here.
Thank you.
Bless you, Moses.
Lord Monckton is, in my opinion, the very best of a small but hardy band of skeptics who try and hold back the tidal wave of conventional thinking, accepted thought, what is called settled science in this discussion about climate change. But I think the tide has begun to turn. The numbers on his side are beginning to swell, and I think you'll begin to see why when he gives you his little talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. My lords, that's me. Ladies and gentlemen, what a delight it is to be here in Canada. When I got Moses' letter, I was very excited. It said, every year we invite 50 of the world's greatest minds to come to Toronto and give us their ideas. But this year it's going to be different. We're going to bring 50 of the world's greatest minds and you. So, thank you, Moses, baby. It is a delight to be here, and I am notorious for plain speaking, but I do not intend to give offense to anyone, so if you want to cry, please do it quietly. Now, at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they don't do simple. So if you ask them to call a spade, they would instead call it a one-person-operated, manually controlled, foot-powered implement of simple and robust, yet adequately efficacious lignometallic composition, designated primarily, though by no means exclusively, for utilization on the part of hourly paid operatives deployed in the agricultural, horticultural, or constructional trades or industries, as the case may be, for purposes of carrying out such excavational tasks or duties as may from time to time be designated by supervisory grades as being necessary, expedient, desirable, apposite, or germane, with regard to the ongoing furtherance of the task or objective in hand, or, on the other hand, underfoot, Secretary-General. Now, part of the problem with the climate debate is that so much gasboard language like that has been used, and there's been too little plain scientific and economic thinking. And so the entire political class has been captured by an idea which, as always with the best bad ideas, has a grain of truth in it, which is then exaggerated beyond all reason. This has happened before. One thinks of the Dreyfus case, for instance, when we go back to France. And there, an officer of the French General Staff was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 10 years torture and imprisonment on Devil's Island for having committed a spying crime which he had not committed. And the entire establishment covered up even when they realized they got it wrong. And one man decided that this was not right, it should be corrected, and eventually persuaded Émile Zola, the great journalist of his day, to write an article in the only newspaper that would allow the unofficial side of the story to be given. And it was called, and I'm going to call my talk today in honor of the Québécois. Are there any Québécois in the house here today? Very good. Give them a round of applause. They need all the help they can get. And so I am going to begin my speech in French with the words j'accuse. And that's the end of the French bit. Now, I'm going to do what Zola did. I'm going to read to you a letter to your Prime Minister, just as he wrote to his President. Letter to the Honourable Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada. Sir, it is an honour to stand upon the soil of a noble nation, devoted to liberty, and governed by one who is not ashamed to express that devotion. In this great city, not 4 weeks ago, you said of the generations to come, they must be forever reminded, forever, that the freedom and peace they stand to inherit was earned through struggle and sacrifice, and must always be cherished as a precious and unique thing. During the 20th century, communism's poisonous ideology and ruthless practice slowly bled into countries all around the world on almost every continent. The result was nothing short of catastrophic. More than 100 million souls were lost, an almost incomprehensible number. Our hearts break for those who suffered, and we mourn for those who were crushed. In Canada, we feel this pain so acutely because nearly 1/4 of all Canadians were either held captive by communism's chains or are the sons and daughters of those who were. Recent events in the Ukraine are a warning. The fascist and communist regimes of the 20th century were transient but murderous species of an eternal menace that the political philosophers of early imperial China, meditating upon the fundamental divide in politics that subsists to this day, characterized as legalism. Today we call it totalitarianism. Against it, they placed Confucianism, which we call libertarianism. Legalism is the antithesis of liberty. It demands absolute unanimity on pain of death. The breaching of the Berlin Wall and the melting down of the Iron Curtain marked not the end of totalitarianism, but the end of its confinement. The new menace to liberty is groupthink gone global. The globalization of groupthink is guilefully disguised under the green fig leaf of pietistic environmentalism. From behind that fig leaf emerges today's tumescent totem of totalitarian tyranny, climate change. At Paris next year, almost 200 states parties to the United Nations Framework Convention will gather to do what they mercifully failed to do in Copenhagen 5 years ago, to formalize the infliction upon their peoples of a binding and irrevocable treaty which, under the guise of addressing the non-problem that was man-made climate change, would establish for the first time in the history of our species a global totalitarian tyranny. Even if our influence on the climate were every bit as great as the agents of this constitutional monstrosity know well by now that it is not, the cost of the measures that they have already enacted and now propose to enact for its abatement would be flagrantly disproportionate to any environmental or economic benefit. Sir, no government that you lead will assent to any such treaty that would put the world in chains. Yet already it has been openly said, not least by Sir David King, Britain's rather implausible climate change ambassador, testifying before the Environmentalist Committee of the House of Commons not long ago, that it will be necessary only to wait for the eventual fall of your government to ensure that Canada too is irreversibly signed up to the new world order, whatever any future electorate may wish. Henceforth, the new totalitarians will openly thwart democracy by the abuse of the treaty-making power to circumvent the convention that no parliament may bind its successors. A parliament is for a few years. A treaty is forever. The cost of this universal tyranny is already being paid in that most precious of all coinages, human lives. In the bitterly cold British winter of 2 years ago, blamed, of course, on global warming, I visited a lady of 85. To my horror, throughout that abnormally long and savage winter, she had been unable to switch on the heating in her home. The price of fuel oil had risen beyond all reason and beyond her means. It had risen chiefly because the British government had irrationally doubled the taxes and charges on energy over the previous 5 years in the name of demonstrating what it bizarrely described as leadership in the fight against climate change, which has been going on for 4.5 billion years. But the British government has come to fight it. In the United Kingdom alone, there are some 24,000 excess deaths of cold every winter. As more and more people installed central heating, these deaths had been declining. Yet in recent years, they have increased again alarmingly as people cannot turn their heating on. In that cruel winter, the excess deaths rose by 7,000 to 31,000. The victims of the climate scam didn't die because the weather was cold. They died because their homes were cold. The British government's climate policy had seen to that. And who will speak for the brutalized, the diseased, and the starving in Africa, in South America, and in China? Ours is the first generation in which the global eradication of poverty and consequently of overpopulation and the environmental degradation of which the previous speaker so movingly and so brilliantly spoke became realistically achievable. Instead, the trillions that could have ended poverty are diverted from the pockets of the poor to the groaning coffers of the rich with the chimera of climate mitigation as the flimsy cover story. More is at stake even than human life. All the hallmarks of totalitarianism that were first discerned by the earliest opponents of Lenin, of Hitler, and of Mao are present in the behavior and utterances of those who would profit by enslaving the planet in the name of saving it. Already, over and over again, they demand the death sentence for treason against the planet or high crimes against humanity. For those of us who dare, on serious and legitimate scientific and economic grounds, to question any tenet of their new and dismal credo. The near-universal official adoption of a pseudo-scientific dogma no less doctrinaire and no less potentially harmful than eugenics or Lysenkoism, the fatal attenuation of the quantitative as well as of the moral sense, the replacement of logic and the scientific method in schools worldwide by the crude and shameless subjection of innocent schoolchildren to the half-witted environmentalist propaganda of which several of you here have spoken to me today in this state, the abject deference of elected parliaments and their unresisting transfer of their powers and of their people's treasure to an alphabet soup of unelected supranational entities, the unsupervised operation of these anti-democratic institutions beyond the recall of any electorate, out with the scrutiny of any auditor, and firth of the jurisdiction of any court, the de facto immunity of the new global classe politique and its protégés, from prosecution even for outright financial corruption or blatant scientific fraud, the replacement of genuine religion by the new shamanistic superstition of furious environmental zealotry, the state's dirigiste neo-monopsony of climate research that purchases the self-interested and instinctually etatiste acquiescence of academia, the glamorous allure of noble cause corruption, the tendency of lobby groups towards profitable extremism, the curious incuriosity of the press, the druidical pietism of innumerate politicians in search of an issue dimly understood, and the coalescence of powerful vested interests everywhere around canting profiteers of doom. All these auguries of impending tyranny have expensively coalesced in the promotion of a pandemic of pusillanimous panic about, of all things, the weather. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the longest sentence you ever heard. I accuse the Prince of Wales, Ban Ki-moon, Barack Hussein Obama, Al Gore, and Rajendra Pachauri of preaching self-denial while flagrantly flaunting their failure to practice personally the restraint they so readily and so profitably enjoin upon others. I accuse the European Union, the United Nations, and such-like self-serving entities of profitably exploiting the plight of the poor while shamefully ignoring it. I accuse Al Gore, the United Nations Framework Convention, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, of overstating the likely future warming of the Earth, the costs and consequences of such warming, and the imagined and imaginary benefits of abating it, while understating the costs of abatement. I accuse the IPCC of having falsely claimed in its 1990 first assessment report that it had substantial confidence in its then prediction of near-term global warming, which has proven since then to be double the observed warming rate. I accuse the IPCC of having allowed a single scientist in 1995 to replace 5 correct statements in its second assessment report to the effect that no human influence on global temperature could yet be detected, with a single false statement saying the direct opposite. The climate consensus, then, is a consensus of just one man. I accuse the IPCC of having falsely attempted to abolish or minimize the medieval warm period, seen clearly here in an earlier record by it and also in a sea level record, in its 2001 assessment report, in defiance of overwhelming evidence in the learned journals that that period was real, was near global, and was almost everywhere warmer than the present. I accuse the IPCC of having, without scientific justification, permitted the inclusion in its 2007 fourth assessment report of a statement that all Himalayan glaciers would vanish by 2035, and I accuse Dr. Pachauri, its climate science chairman, of having for many months dismissed as anti-scientific all attempts to correct this error. I accuse Dr. Pachauri and the IPCC of refusing to correct on request an influential error in the fourth assessment report by which they falsely stated that the rate of global warming was itself accelerating and that we were to blame. I accuse the IPCC of having falsely claimed with 95% confidence in its 2013 fifth assessment report that recent global warming was mostly man-made, and I accuse the universities of Queensland and of Reading of falsely claiming that research by their personnel had found 97.1% of 11,944 scientific papers explicitly stating that recent warming was mostly man-made, when the researchers themselves, in their own data file, had marked only 64 papers, or 0.5% of the entire sample, as endorsing the supposed consensus thus described. I accuse Britain's oldest taxpayer-funded lobby group, the Royal Society, emulated by its profiteering clones worldwide, of abandoning the scientific objectivity enjoined upon it at the time of its foundation, of suppressing scientific evidence and opinion unhelpful to its bottom line, of claiming as certain the inherently uncertain in the climate, and of bullying without mercy any scientist who dares to disagree with it. I accuse the editors of Science, Nature, and such-like once learned journals of having suppressed scientific papers with which they disagreed, and I accuse the president of the American Physical Society of willful prejudice in having dismissed the two blameless editors of Physics and Society for having dared to publish a paper by me questioning correctly, as events have shown, the rate at which the world was predicted to warm. I accuse the vast majority of the global academic and scientific elite of sheep-like silence in the face of the bastardization of science and the repudiation of reason and the scientific method for profit by a greedy but powerful few. I accuse Greenpeace and such-like lobby groups of exploiting the environment as a mere cover for their totalitarian political ambitions and of relentlessly brainwashing their hapless and untutored supporters with scientific misrepresentations. I accuse the world's news media of failing to report almost any scientific evidence or fact, however relevant, casting doubt upon the party line on climate. In particular, that the satellites show no global warming at all for 17 years, 9 months. There is the actual record from the scientists. There is the trend line calculated on it. It is horizontal. No warming has happened for 17 years, 9 months. I bet you haven't been told that before. That sea level may not be rising at all. Green on this graph is the actual measured sea level. Red is what was published. Do you notice the difference between the two? That global sea ice extent, here is the official record, has changed little in the past 35 years. That hurricane intensity, frequency, and duration are just about at their least in half a century. That floods are not increasing globally, that the fraction of the world's land under drought that you see here is not increasing, that wind farms kill rare birds by the million while adding to CO2 emissions and not reducing them, and that the cost of preventing global warming that isn't occurring is 10 to 100 times that of adapting to its consequences, even if it were to occur. Prime Minister, you have done your best to throw into reverse in your country the bandwagon of lies to which the world's classe politique had clung, and clung not for any noble purpose, but instead for reasons of political expediency, social convenience, and financial profit. Your nation has wisely and rightly resiled from the costly but useless Kyoto Protocol, for the one good point of that treaty was that it contained an explicit provision permitting states parties to give 3 months' notice to quit. That is my reason for writing. I invite you, sir, to propose to your fellow heads of government that any climate treaty should contain an escape clause, for that would spare us from losing forever that liberty which, though it be our birthright, each new generation must vigorously and vigilantly defend for itself and for those who will follow. Canada has long stood as a redoubt against totalitarianism and a welcoming foster mother to millions of its victims. By the one small step that I have proposed, you may yet prevent the nations of the earth from committing themselves purposelessly and permanently, not only to a cruel diversion of their generosity from doing good to doing nothing but harm, but also to an abrogation of their sovereignty and of their people's democratic freedom of decision on a vain pretext, which after a few more years have passed, will be seen by all to have been a mere will-o'-the-wisp that vanished away in the kindly light of reason, of evidence, and of events. God bless you, sir, and God bless Canada.
Sir,
Thank you.
tell them what you really think.
I watered it down a bit. I do apologize.
So in this increasingly volatile debate, I think the irrepressible humor of Lord Monckton, as well as his imperious authority, have led the charge, and I do sense that more and more people are swinging over to the skeptical side. Here in Canada, of course, we face significant rises in hydro costs, and I hate the windmills. Not just because of the hijacked money, it's because of the birds. They build the windmills where the winds are. And guess where the birds are? Where the winds are. Lauren Benchley, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
While
Put a
we're just
hand
standing
up.
here.
That's it. There you go.
Okay, Lord. It was a good one. Let's
Yeah.
walk in the back and take
What is the difference between a lord and a viscount?
A viscount is a very grand... I've been asked what is the difference between a lord and a viscount. A viscount is very grand and very rare. You are in the presence of greatness. There are only 29 viscounts in the whole world. And 2 of them are here, because not only am I a viscount, but the next speaker, and if you thought I was any good, just wait till you hear him, Matt Ridley, he's a viscount as well. So you've captured 2 out of 29. Keep working at it. You could yet collect the full set.
Can you be a lord and a viscount at the same
A
time?
viscount is a lord, but a lord is not necessarily a viscount.
I see.
You have to be very specially grand. I'll tell you how I got my peerage. I worked really hard at it. I chose my parents carefully.
That's splendid.